welcome back to the channel of Dad Financially Fallen. I had done a video just talking about, the tax benefits of owning a home and looking at some of the comments on it. Not like a whole lot of there, but anywho, got my attention. They were talking about whether or not if renting would be more beneficial. So I kind of wanted to do a cost benefit analysis and whether it's better to rent or to buy. Now, granted, given your particular market area, individual experiences will vary. I'm going to be focusing on Orange County, California, because that's where I'm at. Now, granted, if you are in Chattanooga, Tennessee, or out there in Oklahoma, North Dakota, Arizona, or maybe international, this might be a much different conversation for you. So that's why I kind of want to show my math and where I'm kind of coming from on it. And then granted, if you guys want the calculator, then always reach out. I'm more than happy to provide it. But this is kind of some of the things that I'm going to be looking at. So looking at stock ticker VU, 30-year average, about like 10%. Last 30 years for Orange County, home growth, right? I got a small, typo over there. We got a mortgage rate, assuming 6%. Average OC home price just shy of $1 million, using a 20% down payment. Now, granted, you can go smaller than that, but then you have to deal with PMI and factoring that into the equation. So I just went ahead and opted for 20%. We're going to assume 1% for our property taxes. So factoring in PITI, that's going to be principal, interest, taxes, and insurance. I've got the actual, what's going to be there for your PI. That's your principal and your interest on that. Then we're going to have our property taxes and then what we think we're going to be paying for our insurance. Take that over the whole year, annualized. And then I actually, wanted to put this growing at like 1% for property taxes and the insurance. Because after you pay off your mortgage, you're still going to have to deal with property taxes and insurance. Then I went ahead and average OC rent for the same house. We're looking at about $4,500. So automatically we can see that there's potential savings in there. And then, annualize that, we can see like, man, I'm saving $15,000 by not, owning. And then you start to think about if I was to grow that at, 1% a year, where is that going to be in 30 years? I'm still going to have to pay rent if I don't buy that property. So after I pay off my mortgage, assuming I paid off my mortgage, I have a refinance, taking out another, a HELOC, for whatever it may be. Now in 30 years, now I'm just paying, $15,000, but in 30 years over here, I am still going to be paying that rent. So what are we going to do with our annualized savings that meantime? So I'm looking at a 30-year time horizon to buy a house or just shy of $1 million. You're probably going to have $250,000 annual salary. And then I'm assuming married filing joint. So between federal and state, so here's our federal marginal 24 plus is California, which is going to be at 9.3. It's just going to give me a total. Now granted, if you go more and dive into the minutia, the detail, there might be additional taxes we want to consider, but this is just kind of being a general baseline. So let's talk about renting. All right, so because I didn't dip into my 401k to go pull that out, or maybe attach a brokerage account, I'm just gonna assume it's either coming from a traditional 401k or a Roth 401k. So in this first one, I have my $180,000 over there. I'm contributing $15,000 a year into it. I am getting this number from this savings right over here. So if I didn't have to spend that extra money paying for my mortgage, the insurance, the taxes on it, that additional $15,000, assuming I was a diligent, consistent saver, and I said, hey, I'm going to take that extra money and I'm going to lobby it into my 401k. That's where we're getting this contribution. So we take our contribution, add it to our beginning balance, and then with our growth on it is how we're getting to what's happening over here. And then we also have our tax savings because, I am a savvy tax guy over here. I do acknowledge that this $15,000 contribution into it is going to generate some tax savings. So based on that $15,000, where I'm at with my marginal federal and state, that's $5,000 in tax savings. So I saved $5,000 from just putting $15,000 into it, just to pay my future self. And then over the course of 30 years, what's happening? My cumulative tax savings, I would have saved $150,000 by saving additional $15,000 a year into it. And my 401k, granted, I'm just using something very consistent over here, just 10% year over year, which obviously not always going to happen. You're going to have up years, you're going to have down years. But also, as I get later on in life and closer to retirement, I'm also going to be tapering off. So then maybe, over here at year 10, instead of going at 100% VU, then maybe I'm just 80-20. Or maybe once I get to the year 15, I'm 70-30. And then as I get to 20, here I am at 60-40. And then I'm right over here at 25, maybe on a 50-50 portfolio. And then you would see that this growth that I have in there is not so exponential. This is someone with an extreme risk tolerance to just keep his gas on the pedal all the way through. Consistent investing on that kind of compound growth. But it also goes to show you, the power of compound growth too, right? And this person over here for 30 years, let's say they're retiring at age 65, man, that was them starting pretty consistent. I mean, granted, to get to 180,000 by 30, you've done a pretty good job too. So, there's merits to this. Right here, we're looking at a 401k at retirement at $5.8 million. But then you have to factor in your taxes. Now, I'm just going ahead and I'm assuming steady rate on it. We don't have that crystal ball. We don't know what's going to happen with future tax rates. It could go up, it could go down. If you look at the 70s and 80s when it comes to income taxes, relatively we're in a low area. It could go back up to that. It just depends on which administration is in office at that time. So I'm just assuming with my assumption that, that 33% from right over here, and, we didn't do anything too crazy. We just kind of took it out. We would pay almost $2 million in taxes. And then you have to factor in your rent. So here we are over here, 30 years, what our rent is going to be. And, once again, we could still grow that at 1% and still factor it in. But to make the math simple, just for illustration purposes, is, we just took that, we multiplied it against 30. So overall, we had our 401k, we had our tax savings, then we had to pay our taxes, and subtracting also what we had in rent, you're left over with just shy of $1.9 million by not buying and taking the savings and putting into your 401k. Now, granted, your tax savings over here, if you want to take it one step further and go down that rabbit hole, is like, okay, what if I was going to take this into my brokerage account? And then you can also have another area for compounding to really illustrate what you could do with your growth rate. So let's just say, you know what? I just don't want to deal with taxes at all. Paying almost $2 million in taxes does not sound like fun. I'm going to forego that. And I'm going to say, hey, I'm just going to pay it right up front when the Pipers due. And I'm going to go into a Roth 401k. So here I am, same thing. We have our 180, and then I'm going to contribute that 15,000. So by the time we get to the end of it, our 401k, because we need to change the investment strategy, we need to change the time horizon, we're still going to have that $5.8 million. And then the additional taxes that we ended up paying, that's something that we're just going to have to factor that in, because we didn't have any tax savings. We had additional taxes. But that 150,000, you think about like, hey, overall taxes over here, yeah, I think I'm better off just paying the 150,000 right now. And then that way I don't have to pay almost $2 million in taxes on this 5.8. So then that's an additional savings right there. I just found $2 million in savings just by paying $150,000. But then when I look over here at our rent again, that's still going to be a pretty big bite out of the apple. But overall, we still have $3.5 million. And in retirement, housing is going to be a big driving expense for people. But you still have your travel. You're still going to have maybe long-term caravans, or if there's taking kids college or grandkids college or whatever it may be, you still have a pretty ample surplus. Now, it's important to annotate the difference between real value versus nominal value. And essentially what we think about is what inflation is going to do. And if we want to say, hey, that's great, I'm going to have $3 million in the future, but by the time inflation is done to it, what does that really mean in today's dollars? So nominal is our current dollars, and real is after, if I was going to factor in inflation and whatnot. I haven't taken that extra step here, but as I've kind of talked our way through it, there's a lot of different ways you can take this further, and talking to your financial advisor on what makes sense for your particular outlook. And that's exactly what we're trying to get at. Lots of different lenses to go look at here. So here's option number 2. I'm gonna buy. So going to go back, I have $900,000. I'm gonna put $180,000 down. So that means my principal over here is gonna be at $720,000. Assuming 30 years, I'm gonna have 6% mortgage. Granted, maybe the rates go down, I refinance, or maybe there was another housing boom and this goes. Lots of different ways to go take this. And as you can see on the screen, there's already a lot of different ways I've kind of taken this. So at first part of this is going to be kind of our amortization table, just talking about what happens with the mortgage. So we start over here at 720. After we get through our first couple of years, you'll notice most of this is just going to interest. Even though I'm paying $52,000 a year, $43,000 is going to interest. And only a small amount going to principal. The good news is, this being under $750,000, at least the tax savings on this interest is 100% applicable. It's not like I have to worry about mortgage loan interest being limited by going over $750,000, or if it was over $1 million, then also having to do that for California. So it makes the tax calculation a lot more simpler for illustration purposes. But I digress. So as we pay more into our interest in the beginning years, we start to pay less because we're paying more into principal. So you'll see by the end of it all, I bought for my principal at $720,000, but I'm going to pay almost $850,000 in interest. But then when you think about, hey, what happens at the end of it all? Well, great. Then I only have to worry about my property taxes and insurance. I mean, that's the end goal. But you're paying twice as much, more than twice, just on the interest. And that's why banks do it, because that's the end goal for them. And then we want to think of like, okay, great, what's going to happen to my house? We talked about house growth rate. I started off at 900,000, and then in 30 years potentially I'm looking at 3.6. Though that might seem a little bit far-fetched and extravagant, it's really not, especially if you, granted, depending where you live. Garden Grove, Westminster, Orange, Irvine. Back in the 90s and 80s, you were buying these homes for, $20,000, $30,000, and easily now these are going to be $1 million homes and up. So it's really not that far-fetched to think in 30 years your home's going to be worth, $3.6 million. That's going to be equity in your pocket essentially. So if you wanted to go tap into that for long-term care, or if you're just trying to pass down, wealth to your children, it's still part of your net worth. It's still something that comes into it. If you decide if you want to sell and then use that to go buy a new primary property to winter in and a new property to vacation in, you have options. There's lots of different ways to go move this money around. And just looking at maintenance, now granted, I'm just using $1,000 a year in maintenance. If you buy an older home, it might be every 5 years you have to go put on something major. So now here comes another 10,000. These are just overall just assumptions in here. I just want to put something that's consistent, because maybe consistently you're not putting $1,000 a year into these houses. I've only bought new houses and I don't even put $1,000 a year into it. And it hasn't been that way in a decade. But older homes, yeah, you might have to go and say, I didn't spend anything for those 5 years, and all of a sudden I have to go spend $10,000 replacing a roof or, a water heater, whatever it may be. So I'm just using $1,000 consistently. I am growing it. That way we see that it is, somewhat indexed a little bit for inflation. And then I also wanted to look at the tax savings. So by having that home, I'm saving on the property taxes and the mortgage interest over here. With OBBA passing, that SALT cap is at $40,000, and if I'm expecting my income to be at $250,000, I'm probably going to be underneath that $40,000. So I can assume with great confidence that I'm going to be able to take 100% of the property taxes despite the SALT cap than our mortgage interest. So that's how I'm getting to our tax savings just on this home. So I'm taking that $17,000. I'm going to be a consistently good investor, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put it into the brokerage and I'm going to grow it. So then, this is where we get into our, VU and chill mindset. So now we go ahead and every year we're going to get that $17,000. We're going to put it in the brokerage and we're going to invest it. Every year we're going to take our tax savings, put it in VU, and just keep it going, VU and chill all the way through. So by the end of it all, I'm still going to have roughly $900,000 in my brokerage account ready to go. Now, the cool thing about this one compared to the traditional 401k, at least your brokerage account, you're only dealing with the capital gain. I'm assuming that I'm only putting in a VU, I haven't sold, and there's going to be this huge capital gain problem in here. But that's okay. We can contend with capital gains, because if you do something and the year that the capital gain event happens, there might be some options for some good tax planning. But if you know that you're going to be years out from it, there's great tax planning that you can do. So now that I've established, I've got this, brokerage account with almost $1 million of gain in there, and I'm going to have $3.6 million. How do I tap into this stuff? Let's just say I don't do anything, no tax savvy strategy. I'm just going to say, hey, here's my equity, here's my brokerage, my long-term gain taxes. I've liquidated all of it. Granted, this long-term gain taxes, all I did was just take what was in the brokerage and then I multiplied against the 20%. The downside with that is I also do acknowledge that I've put in money. So it's not really this being at that. It's going to be more like 600. So there's going to be additional tax savings on this long term. Acknowledging the weaknesses in the calculator, but it's really here for just illustration purposes. And then factoring in what I'm going to have for taxes, insurance, and maintenance over the next 30 years after it's all paid off. I'm thinking I'm going to have a little shy of $500,000 that I'll pay. So, despite all that, I'm still going to have $3.8 million in the hopper to kind of work with. Not too shabby. And when we think back to what we had over here, 3.8, that's already beaten out the Roth and definitely smoked our traditional 401k. Then let's just say, hey, you know what? I didn't want to go contend with, paying $180,000. I'm going to put it in the CRUT. And that way, for the next 30 years, I take out, let's just say $80,000 a year. All those capital gains coming out to me on the K1, I'm not going to have to pay taxes on it because that's my only source of income because I wasn't putting into my 401k or anything like that. Great. So now I'm just really contending over here with my taxes, insurance, and maintenance. Now I got $4 million. So now I come up $200,000 from the previous one. So when I think about it all, rent versus buy, understanding the weaknesses in this model and identifying them, I think is really good points that you need to think about. This is why this is strictly educational. It's not financial advice. It's to kind of prompt you to start thinking about these things and go talk to your advisor and get the actual modeling done for your particular situation. Because this is really market specific. I am showcasing Orange County. But what if you're in an area that, its annual growth rate is 1%? What does that do to the equation? Because, I'm assuming almost 5% over here. So if I could put that into a 1, obviously this is not going to be nearly as strong. Let me go over here. I'm going to change it to on this assumption one. There we go. Beautiful. Now all of a sudden I'm only looking at $1 million. Granted, what's $1 million in 30 years after you factor in inflation? Then hey, I'm not going to go buy. I'm going to go rent and I'm going to put it into the Roth because that was definitely the best option. Or even renting and putting in the traditional. But that's not the case. This is really market specific. I am listing generic home expenses. So if you're in an area with Melrose and now you're looking at 2% for revenue, or what's your HOA, or if you need to do extensive remodel. I was mentioning homes that are older when you have to put like $100,000 into an overhaul or $30,000 into your backyard. That can drastically increase those expenses and then eat away at your profit margins over here. Now I've hit on the home ones. I'm going to hit on the renting next. Behavioral finance 101, lifestyle creep. We are not people who are going to be more likely to take this extra savings and lobby it back into investment vehicles. In my industry, it is with my professional opinion that most people are going to take that extra cash flow and they're going down to the Maldives, they're doing Bora Bora, they're getting the Rolex, they're keeping up with the Joneses. That's great. I just saved you $15,000 a year. What are you going to do with it? I got more money to go play with. But if you are a consistent and diligent investor, it can really show you what you can do with it. But you have to have that mindset to say, hey, I'm gonna take that money and I'm gonna put it to work. And if you automate your savings, you know what? There's no reason that this can't work. But if you have that money in the back of your pocket, it's gonna burn a hole in it. So the more you're able to automate, the better it is for you. You can't spend it if you don't have it. What if we take out a HELOC or a second mortgage? Yeah, absolutely. What we're doing with the equity is an equally important question. If you're a diligent homeowner and you never tap into your equity, then it's always going to be sitting there growing for you. That equity component is just going to grow because you're paying down that mortgage. But if you're looking at that as a piggy bank, then obviously that's going to also eat into this. Market volatility rarely allows us to experience straight linear growth. This applies for the homes that I talked about. The American housing market never experienced any real, shock until 2008, but that's still kind of lingering in the back of our dark recesses of our minds, what could happen to our markets. And then you have to think about the stock market too. VU's been great. It's historically tried and true. That's why I went to go use it for this illustration. But it doesn't mean that we can't go through bad areas. And if you retire, and as soon as you retire, you go into a bear market and you didn't ever reallocate over here because of the capital gains or whatever it may be, then all of a sudden you're drawing down on your portfolio in a bear market, which is a huge risk. And Monte Carlo, which is stress test something through 1,000 different market cycles, is going to factor that in. Case in point, always go talk to your advisor. So market volatility. And then time horizon matters. If I'm only going to be in this house for a year, hey, I'm just taking a job before I go on to my next one. Do I want to go buy every single time? Because then you're going to have milling out these closing costs. Either you're buying or selling, or maybe you buy and then you go to the next one and then you buy and then you're building up, and it makes us really complicated position. Granted, you're growing your real estate portfolio, and that's a great thing to go do, and we can talk about how that modeling works. But if I'm just buying and selling, those closing costs eat into your overall gain. So just thinking about what your goals and objectives are. And maybe that warrants you renting for a couple of years because you're just trying to figure out if this job works out for you. Or you're like, hey, you know what? Eventually, I want to see myself buying where it's a great school district where the kids are at. So lots of things to consider in it. And though I'm going to show you some really big numbers and maybe you get all doe-eyed with the possibilities, but everything kind of comes in. I just want to make sure that I'm always, holding myself accountable and noting the weaknesses in any kind of strategy I'm trying to show and just talking things through. But anywho, I hope you enjoyed this segment of rent versus buy. And if you liked it, subscribe, drop a like, leave a comment. I do listen and here to answer any questions. Once again, this is not financial advice. This is educational purposes only. This is for fun. Go ahead and talk to your advisor and see if this makes sense for you. Thank you for stopping by. Bye.